key focus is how quantum mechanics allows two or more particles to exist in what is called an entangled state. What happens to one of the particles in an entangled pair determines what happens to the others, even if they are far apart. Episode 5 of Constellation, this one entitled "The Sound is Better 5 miles out," or 5 miles out, the sound is better. So with that quote from Irina about entangled particles in quantum physics, we add another layer. We've been talking about how Joe might be slipping realities or in the wrong reality or some sort of reality, and there's another reality that sometimes you can see. What we hear from that entanglement, if that's what we are, is that what happens to one determines what happens to the other. And she does say two or more entangled particles. Keep that "or more" close. I don't think it matters yet, but I think it probably will. Well, so I am Sean. This is Sean's Take. There will be spoilers for this episode and other episodes of this series that have aired. I will use clips as is allowed by the copyright laws of 1976 under the fair use provision. Let's get into this. So the complexity of this puzzle that is Constellation is getting bigger, getting more and more. I lost my place. So we do see Henry and Bud. Let's talk about Henry and Bud for a second. So we've cleared up that they are, in fact, in different realities. They aren't occupying the same reality and trying to stay away from each other. They are, in fact, in two different realities. And Bud is pushing the envelope to try and exert control in Henry's reality. So what I think is that the two of them slipped reality, and Bud wants back into his original reality. Because if they slip reality, then Bud would have remembered from his reality his dog's name. But the guy that he killed said that he got his own dog's name wrong, meaning Henry's dog was named something else. So I think they've switched. And the fact that they can communicate through the mirror and watch each other through reflections. We thought we knew that with the computer reflection, which now that we've seen the mirror, the computer reflection was done really kind of bad. But that's interesting. So I do believe that Joe has slipped reality and she's in the other reality. And they've swapped places. So the Joe that's dead is the Joe from the reality we've been watching that had been having the affair with Frederick. And then, of course, Irina, we don't know. They swap, but we know that Irina has a dead counterpart and Joanne has a dead counterpart. And in Alice's vision of Joe's funeral, we saw Paul alive. So Paul has a live counterpart. So only Bud and Henry and Alice have living counterparts. So it's interesting that Bud can intentionally exert control over Henry and go so far as to make him wed himself, which Henry handled pretty well, which everybody handled pretty well. It was a strange moment. And Bud can do that because he gave up the pills, I think. So he's not taking his lithium, which puts him in a little more control, or maybe a little more in touch with the veil between realities. I'm not sure that's the right term for it. And of course, the Joe we've been following won't take her lithium either. So maybe she's closer to the veil. Alice isn't taking any lithium. So we do, after calling an ambulance for Magnus, who fell and hit his head on the piano. Joe, he's not dead. That's good. Joe calls the ambulance, leaves the door open, takes Alice, they go and get the cow device thing, tube, and head to the cabin. So they had to cross out of Germany into Denmark and then over to Sweden to get to the cabin. And on the way, we learn that there's a monster in Alice's dreams that scares her and makes her hide in cabinets. And Joe admits there are things that scare her too, and asks Alice if she could draw her monster. And it turns out that Alice draws the cosmonaut that hit the IIS that Joe saw, Irina. So that's the first time Joe realizes that Alice is involved, or at least being touched by whatever's going on. And of course, it's further proof to herself that she's not crazy. Everyone she knows is trying to convince her she's psychotic, and she's trying to convince them that she's not. Which, by the way, If everybody in your life starts telling you you're psychotic, don't argue with it. Just apologize for your conduct and get on with your life. You'll never win. So they go to the, what's it called? The Marine. They, Alice and Joe go to the Skagerrak Marine Observatory, and these are the people that sent her the tapes, and we get to meet them. On their drive, we did learn that if the tape deck is closer to the cow, the voices are clearer. There's almost no static. Joe figured that out pretty quick. And Alice did say that the woman speaking Russian on the tape was her monster, the Valia, that she had drawn. The cosmonaut in the orange suit. She calls her the Valia. I'm sure that's going to matter, because maybe we're mishearing it and it's not actually the Valia and it's a takeoff on something else, or it's something written on the... But Alice does describe the Valia as circling the earth, alive and dead at the same time. So it's more Schrodinger cat sort of things. So we saw in the one episode where Henry was dancing with Irina, and he turned her and saw the dead body, the skeleton. And it makes me wonder if they slip and Irina is floating those moments and then back. Terrifying. So we do get to meet these two. I like these two, the observatory guardians, and they tell the story of the tapes and how they learned that 5 miles out the sound is best. They get on the boat and go 5 miles out, and Joe is agitated, and they're actually playing the tape of Paul calling for help from his capsule coming back, which of course Joe remembers being her in the capsule coming. Alice steals the phone from the observatory. I'm not sure which sibling she stole it from, but she stole it. And hacks the code, because the code was written in big font on the wall. 8787 might matter, by the way, because it was on the wall a few times. And she does call and checks in with Dad to let him know that she's okay, where they're going. But she's not as scared of Joe as she once was. So Joe and Alice get to Sweden, and Joe gets to a crossroads that she doesn't remember. And Alice says, yeah, it's that way. That's the way we go to the cabin. And for some reason, Joe doesn't trust much. And the first thing I thought of watching it was, while traveling through the woods, I came upon a path that diverged. And being one traveler, I couldn't take both. She decides not to take either, which is an interesting choice. And she instead drives across the frozen lake. And it's interesting. This is one of those things where she says, we're just going to drive across the lake. Alice says, what? Unbuckle your seatbelt. And they drive across the lake. And at first I thought, unbuckle your seatbelt? What do you mean? And I thought, right. No, if you make the mistake, you're going across and the ice break. You don't want to be trapped with your seatbelt. Just something I noticed. But when you grow up in those countries and that happens sometimes, you sort of learn as you go. So they get to the cabin uneventfully, thank goodness. And Joe is listening to her conversation with Alice on the space station right before the accident. And Alice comes in and says, who is that? And Alice says, that's me and you right before the accident. And Alice says, it's not me. I don't speak Swedish and I don't call you mama. That's another indication to Joe that something is off. The episode ends. We see Alice in the winter hat in the woods of, I believe, Sweden. And she stops and she yells out, mama, in Swedish. And that's where we end. So, summing up, we sort of covered it all the way through. But we're definitely dealing with two realities, maybe more. That's why I think the line from Irina of two or more particles entangled. And what does it mean? What happens to one determines what happens to the other. Because when Henry explained it to Alice, it was the particle decides whether it's white or black when it's observed. White, black, or white and black. And now Irene's saying what happens to one determines what happens to the other. Like if this one determines it's white, what does that mean for this one? So looking forward to the next episode. The questions are mounting. We're getting fewer answers, but it is nice that we're getting some answers. And I think I stumbled on this idea too. So Bud is alive in both, although I can't imagine that's going to be true for long. There's a live Joe and a dead Joe. There's a live Paul and a dead Paul. a live Irina and a dead Irina, but there's also two living being played by twins. We can put both Alices into the same reality and have them in the same room. That would be very interesting. And that's probably why you cast twins. Now, the other reason you cast twins is why they've always cast twins, why the Olsen's twins were famous, because adults have bizarre working hours and children can't work those hours. There's child labor laws. So you hire twins so that you can work the long hours and just swap out the twin. But I think they did this for having two Alices standing next to each other. That's what I think. Let me know in the comments what you think. Please like, subscribe if you're liking these videos. Let me know what else you're watching. But for now, that's it for me. I'm Sean. This is Sean's Take. See you next time.